Hello and welcome to my Bloomburrow set re-review. Today I'll be looking at my highs and lows from my set review grades that I give out before every limited format, and to see where what I did well on and what I did poorly on. Try to improve over time and or card evaluation, and just kind of it gives me a good way to sort of sum up the format, sum up how I felt about it, and some of the cards within it. And so we're just gonna get started right away here with some cards I was wrong about first. I like to do the bad ones first, get them out of the way. Those are the ones people are more interested in, anyways. So we like to start with those. And the first one is Builder's Talent. So I originally gave Builder's Talent a Tier 5 grade, and I think at the end of the format I would have rated it Tier 3. You could argue that, as a build around, it's a Tier 2 card. I think you could make that case, but I think in the aggregate, Tier 3 is probably still appropriate for this card. Um, the the thing about this card is that I missed significantly was the food stuff, because I didn't realize that food counted for this. I didn't clock that for whatever reason. I don't. It was just one of the things. There's going to be stuff like this in the set review. My goal with the set reviews is try to get them out fast. So I did miss that interaction. So I'm not going to say that I didn't miss that. Um, Part of the other thing too here is that the O4 was particularly good. It really did kind of get in the way. Like, it really did block well. There are some formats where an O4 doesn't actually matter, but this format, the O4 felt like it was kind of taking away a lot of what your opponents were trying to do, especially if they were aggressive. And yeah. Now, there were some games where the O4 was just completely meaningless, which I do think didn't sort of prevented this card from being better. It was a build around that made sense and worked. It got better in multiples in kind of that way, that build arounds do. Um, but I think Tier 5 was too low for this. On the opposite end of the spectrum, Driftgloom Coyote. I gave this a Tier 1 grade and ended up being Tier 3. Um, this is actually a bigger miss than from Tier 5 to Tier 3, generally for me, because Tier 1 is supposed to be elite. There were red flags with this card that I should have recognized in previous season. I kind of ignored them, and the reason I ignored them is, oh man, you're going to basically be able to eat a token every single game. That actually wasn't the case. I think that was the biggest miss with this card. Um, you weren't just going to get to eat a token every game. Like, that just wasn't going to happen that often. And also, sort of similar problems that we saw with the Intercessor in March of the Machine, where expensive versions of this effect tend to be pretty bad, or worse than the cheap, like the 3 mana or 4 mana versions, just because you don't really ever want to get into combat with them. So your 5 drop not being able to block is a lot worse than your 3 drop not being able to block. So it's kind of one of those situations where it being more expensive actually does have significant downsides. I do think that this is still a fine card and you should play it, but you shouldn't be taking it as highly as I thought you would early in the format. Bandit's Talent. So Bandit's Talent is the type of card that I'm very high on usually. I like discard. I just like discarding, like your opponent's discarding cards. I like to play low resource games. That's just kind of my play style. The problem with this card is it doesn't give you enough on the front to be good, and it's too easy to play around. It is a card that worked in some decks, but that is sort of the definition of a Tier 4 card and not a Tier 2 card. I thought that this was going to just work in every deck. You were going to play it, and you were going to be like, all right, opponent goes down a card, and then they're basically going down 1.5 cards because they have to keep another land in their hand in the late game. But that just wasn't something that came up or mattered as much as I would have thought. And there's just no board impact, so that's really the biggest problem with this one. Harnesser of Storms. So Harnesser of Storms, I didn't grade especially highly, again Tier 3, but it was actually a Tier 5 card, which essentially to me is unplayable. I don't think this is actually unplayable, but I would rate it in Tier 5 at this point. Like, I don't think I would ever draft it over anything at all, and I'd be trying not to put it in my deck. The biggest problem with it is you have to play the card this turn, which is not usually how these effects work these days, because of because this card showed why they don't usually do that anymore. It's because they don't really function. It means their card's not very good. You have to kind of predict the top card of your deck in limited. There's there's not a ton of deck manipulation, so you're just kind of sitting there like, oh well, I hope the top card of my deck is castable this turn, but maybe it won't be. So that's just kind of what happened a lot. The body didn't matter at all, and the deck that it was trying to be sort of like good in wasn't very good. In the aggregate, yes, there were people playing it at the end of the format, and once people figured out how to build it, if you're like a really elite player, you can play it. I never bothered to actually I never did that. I never drafted blue. I did draft blue red once. I actually streamed that, but I it's yeah, it just isn't a deck that you really want to be drafting um, a ton. Reptilian Recruiter. So Reptilian Recruiter, I really don't have like a lot of excuses on this one. The reason I thought this would be good is that I was like, oh my god, five like it's Grishnok. It's not Grishnok. So the reason it's not Grishnok is that it's 5 mana. So 5 mana again. I was just kind of wrong about 5 mana spells. Like I don't know. In some cases in this format, I was like, oh, I'm gonna follow the rules exactly on 5 mana spells and be like, nope, never gonna give 5 mana spells tier 2 status. And then in some cards, I was like, nope, 5 mana spells all the way to the top. So there were some inconsistencies there that we're gonna iron out next time, hopefully. But the problem with this, I think, primarily is, well, there's a couple of things. First of all, 5 mana 4/2 trample, like a 4/2 trampler didn't matter at all in the format. There was no scenario where it mattered, so that was kind of a problem. The other problem is, like if this had haste instead of trample, it would have been a lot better of a card. I think that they probably should have done that. I think that actually would have been a good change and made it more playable. It wasn't unplayable. Like you could play it in some aggro decks and it wasn't a disaster, but you also just didn't have like random lizards in your decks. Like all the decks that were playing lizards were red-black decks. So you would basically only play this in red-black, and red-black doesn't really want this because what red-black really wanted was to sort of chip in for damage, get your Fireglass Mentor going, get your other stuff going. It didn't want to commit to spending 5 mana to do something, to like... It didn't need a finisher, basically. Red-black didn't really need a finisher, and so this was just unnecessary. Next is Clefttop Lookout. So Clefttop Lookout is a card that I think a lot of people probably got wrong. I don't know exactly. I was pretty wrong about it because I put it in tier 2. I was like, oh my god, it's going to be sick. It's great. The reason that I was wrong about this card is partially format dynamics. Obviously, this is a format-specific card. But this card in particular really highlights the difference between like a 2/2 and a 1/2, or like just a 2 power creature and a 1 power creature, and how different those two things are. Because this thing just never blocked anything ever. Like it just like on the battlefield, this was basically a blank. If this had been a 2/1, and even without reach, like if you had just made it a 2/1 without reach, this card would have been actually, I think, a lot better. Like genuinely, even with stuff like the skunk or the assassin, which we're actually going to talk about in a bit in the format. Just a 1/2 has no middle to late game impact. Like the comparison I made with this card was, oh, this is the MKM 2/2, the I don't remember what it's called, the 2/2 that flipped over and found a land for basically a total of 4 mana. And I was like, oh, that's what this card is. No, that card was a 2/2 the whole time, which actually was better than this giving you the land immediately. So, notes for next time on that. And the final card I was wrong about to talk about today, there's other cards I was wrong about, but these were kind of the biggest ones that I found to talk about. So Seedglaive Mentor, and I wanted to talk a little bit about red-white in general. I thought red-white was going to be a good deck going into the format because I was like, oh, Valiant, you're just getting all these extra bonus triggers for doing stuff you already want to do, like targeting your things. But it kind of turned out that there was more payoffs than there were enablers. Like there just wasn't enough enablers to make this deck super great. And the enablers were often kind of too low impact. Like the enablers weren't good cards on rate. So the enablers had to have the payoffs to be good. And that's kind of where the problem lies a little bit. This card is a payoff that also wasn't good enough on rate. I kind of wish that they had made it a 2/3. I wonder if they tried that. They don't have time to try every single configuration of cards in development. If this had been a 2/3, was it too good? Might have been. Maybe you make it a 2/3, don't give it vigilance. Maybe that's your compromise. Because I think actually on this particular creature, you'd want it to be a 2/3. Usually I'm a 3/2 is better than 2/3 guy, but on this particular creature, I think a 2/3 would have been a little bit nicer. And now some cards I was right about. So first and foremost, Carrot Cake. Um, I was just more right about this than most. When you talk about the Pack Zero Pick One Challenge, winner of the Pack Zero Pick One Challenge, that's me. Whatever. I know, bragging and such. But this is the card that won it for me. Putting it on there instead of Banishing Light, saying it would be either the best or second best white common. I thought it would be the second best white common behind Intrepid Rabbit. That was incorrect. I mean, well, that was arguable. That one's arguable. It's closer than people thought. And really, I really just, this was a foundational win for me because I kind of just saw Carrot Cake and was like, no, this is Hopeful Vigil. I know when everybody saw Hopeful Vigil and they were like, oh, that card's sick. It makes an enchantment. It makes a 2/2. And that was like automatic. I thought this was equally automatic. People seem to disagree on that. I didn't really get why. I don't know. I know that a 2/2 is more than a 1/1, but this gives you so much more on the back end. You're getting 2 scries. You're getting whatever. Now, Hopeful Vigil is still better card than Carrot Cake, I would say, in most formats. But that doesn't mean Carrot Cake's not good. And I did get that one right. Rating Daring Wave Rider as an average card, I think, was actually right, and I think that this is the type of card that it looks similar to Wix Patrol, right? This card is a lot worse than Wix Patrol, and I recognize that in the set review, which we'll see when I get to the Wix Patrol section of the cards I was right about. But people don't necessarily recognize that all the time. They see, oh, well, if I get an instant or sorcery spell in my graveyard, I can do this, and then I'm like basically getting something that's as good as Wix Patrol. Because if you think about it, it's like, what is the best case scenario for this card? It's like, well, either 6 mana 4/4, you like draw 2 cards. That's okay, but you had to play a bad card earlier in the game to get there. Or it's 6 mana 4/4, remove your thing. It's okay, well, that's what Wix Patrol does, and this is just not enabling itself. Like Wix Patrol enables itself, and this doesn't enable itself at all. And a 5/3 and a 4/4, they're comparable. I actually think a 4/4 is probably slightly better body-wise in the mid to late game, but you could make arguments either way. And yeah, I mean, this just doesn't. A lot of the things. One of the things I recognize with this in previous season is it doesn't fit well in any of the decks really. Like there's no deck that like blue-red, you want to be playing cheap spells. Blue-black, you don't want stuff to leave your graveyard. Green-blue, again, you're just not playing any instants and sorceries in green-blue. And in blue-white, like, A, that wasn't a deck, and B, none of the spells in blue-white work with this. So the only home was kind of blue-black, and even there it wasn't super good. Downwind Ambusher. So Downwind Ambusher, this is kind of just a recognition that Wizards of the Coast knows ball and has gotten this archetype of card to be good, finally, after a few years of it being bad. They recognized, no, we need to actually up the power level of these type of effects. The 4 mana, like, kill a thing that was dealt damage this turn. They have done that in the past couple of iterations. They've been pretty good consistently for a while now. This one, just sort of, I was following that pattern. And yeah, I mean, a 4/2 is not necessarily what you want here, but like a 3/3 would have been better, but that's okay. It didn't have to be perfect, so yeah. And then Wix Patrol, as we mentioned earlier. For similar reasons to the previous card, to the order. Like, the reason I put this in tier 1 is I said, okay, so this card looks like a mythic rare from Midnight Hunt. The mythic rare is like Grave Tender or whatever. It was a 6 mana 4/4. It exiled a spell and then did -X equal to the spell's mana value. Obviously, that's better than this, but it's actually not as clear as, because it also did it when it died. But so it's not as clear that this is like on that power level because it only does it once. But the thing is, it enables itself, which the other one didn't do. So that's why I was kind of like, wow, this actually is just like basically as good as that card, and it proved to be as good as that card. This card was a house. It was worthy of a tier 1 rating. It was happy to be first picked. I did actually. It's funny because I gave this a tier 1 grade and then actually cut it from a deck because I had 3 of them and I was playing red black and I was like, I really don't want 3 6-drops in my red black deck. But like that. I've cut tier 1 cards before and I will do it again. But yeah. Made a whole video about Starseer Mentor and why, 5 mana signposts are a problem. Go check that out, by the way. But yeah, this card really meets all the criteria for what I meant in that video and what I was kind of talking about there. It just doesn't do anything by itself. Its stats look so appealing, see, this is the thing is like when stats are on the battlefield, they look like it's like, oh man, that's so good. They have a 3/5 flying vigilance in like certain game states, but in some game states, a 3/5 like vigilance flyer like doesn't matter at all because if you're just going wide enough, this thing just doesn't do enough. It's one of those cards that just looks really appealing, but for me, the ability on it is never. It's just always underperforms people's expectations. Not mine, but everybody else seems to really like this ability for some reason. It just doesn't. It's never like if it's good if you're winning. Like the ability is good if you're winning. So congrats, you have an ability that's good when you're winning. There's just better ways to capitalize on that, and this card is not. Again, it's not saying it's bad. It's a fine card, but to make your deck, like to try to build your deck around this would have been a mistake. And the final card I wanted to talk about being right about, Cash Grab. Similar to Carrot Cake, I just kind of ran it back. I said, nope, we're going to run the football here. Like, this is like, we just had Malevolent Rumble. This card is Malevolent Rumble. And then, like, yes, surprise, it was Malevolent Rumble again. It was just Malevolent Rumble again. Like, it was just as good. I think, part of it is that the format context was better. Like, this card is not as strong as Malevolent Rumble on its face, right? In a vacuum, Malevolent Rumble is a stronger card. There's a reason Malevolent Rumble's in the Vintage Cube and Cash Grab isn't. That's true. With that being said, in the format with a lot of squirrels and stuff that cares about foraging, this card I think is better than Malevolent Rumble. Although Malevolent Rumble would still be good in this format, it just wouldn't be as good as Cash Grab. And yeah, I mean, I just kind of saw that this was Malevolent Rumble and said, and also saw like part of the thesis with why this card would be good is I was like, green black is the best deck. That was what I thought going into the format. Green was going to be the best color. Green black was the best deck. Those two things were both true. Cash Grab was great as a result. And here we are. And voila. Got that one right. And so we come to my overall rating slide, the end of the format for me. How did I rate it? I actually would give it a 7 out of 10. I've come up on the format over the course of it. I originally was kind of lower on it. It was very like blah. Decks were very samey early days. And this tends to happen with all formats. And sometimes it's to the format's detriment and sometimes it's not. I really thought it helped BLB a lot. I thought this made the format a lot better. That the decks kind of got worse over the course of the format. I do think that there's significant deck diversity. There's a lot you can do, especially, again, this is true for all formats, but in higher level pods, you can get more creative. You can do all these more interesting things. Part of this rating is due to my success uniquely the format, obviously $4,000 in tournament earnings and winning the Package Draft Pick 1 challenge, going to leave me with a more positive impression than some people about Bloomburrow. It's just hard. It's going to be hard to disassociate those two things. But I also, green-black squirrels is kind of a deck that appeals to my natural sensibilities as a player. The blue-black deck, I've drafted a ton of blue-black in this format. When blue-black is good, I'm happy. Generally, because that's a deck that I like to play. So I just the graveyardy format mechanics I liked. I'm somebody that my favorite mechanic is flashback. So like that there were some elements of that in this format. I do think it originally for me the format was sort of in the 5 to 6 range. I kind of bumped it up to a 7 and said no. I actually do think that I really did like Bloomburrow. And so that's it for me. That's my set review. Nice and quick and painless this time. I didn't want to go too deep. Just kind of highlighting some stuff I got wrong. A lot of 5 mana double pip stuff to be reevaluating in the next set review. So we'll keep that in mind. Stuff I got right, the cheap cards, and the stuff that's a 2-for-1s. So that's it for me. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed, like and subscribe. I would appreciate it. And stay tuned for the set review for Duskmorn. It's coming out later this week.